I mentioned, the first thing is knowing the problem. Being students here in San Jose, volunteering for local businesses and nonprofits, we had a pretty good handle on what they were struggling with. And we went out and solved it, and we built basically a vertically integrated technology and media company based here in Silicon Valley. I remember pitching my friends because I wanted to bring some of my classmates on with me. They said, man, you're in Silicon Valley, there's Google, there's Deloitte, there's all these large companies, how could you succeed? Like, you should just give it up. And if I would have listened to that, I would have missed out on raising funds. We generated millions of dollars. I've hired about 10 people that work in our company. We have an office on 7th Street. And I would have missed out on the opportunity. So that's why I go back to what I said first, is pitching yourself, believing in the problem that you're solving, and going forward. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think to me, whenever you're pitching, it's really about sort of communicating to an audience. And I think it's really clear, you really need to understand sort of who you're talking to before you sort of figure out who you're going to talk to them. And so I think, we talked about sort of pitching to a customer versus pitching to an investor. But even pitching to an investor, it's important to remember that these investors oftentimes will have sort of different requirements, based on sort of the stage they're in, based on sort of, what their interest is. And so I think it's really important to sort of understand, what your goals are, how all of this stuff sort of links together, and really what's really important to your audience. And part of that is, looking internally at sort of, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. I think, we're talking about pitching here oftentimes in the sense of, raising venture capital investment. But, not every, startup, not every new, company necessarily needs to sort of go down that route. And sometimes, maybe you're looking at something more of a services business. Maybe you're looking at doing something that, will be sort of crowdfunded or whatnot. And I think understanding sort of audience and sort of what you're trying to accomplish with this is really key to sort of getting your pitch down. I think the other thing that's changing a lot these days is we've sort of seen with the rise of AI, these companies are basically able to sort of build really quickly without a lot of people, without a lot of capital. You see here these companies like Cursor and Windsurf, they're basically able to reach tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of ARR with just 5, 10, maybe 15 kind of people. And so I think the whole investment industry is going to change a lot going forward. We're going to see more bootstrapping, we're going to see more sort of different models, and so this is something that's going to constantly evolve.
Thank you. Just to piggyback off of what Larry is saying, one thing you want to make sure you're doing is pattern matching, right? So doing your homework and research as far as who these investors are, what stage do they invest, what vertical. I'm pretty sure it's pretty obvious, right? But another thing you want to make sure you keep track of is what that fundraising cycle is for them. Just like you're a founder, investors are raising capital as well. So just understanding when they're ready to deploy capital, when their fund is going to be closed, is also very essential in understanding what that pattern matching looks like. The second thing I will mention is the best time to raise is when you don't need it at all, right? It takes about 8 to 12 touch points with an investor to earn their trust. So just don't think of it as, hey, I finally have my product, now let me go raise. Do that work before you even start doing that. The goal is to build trust with investors. They're investing in you in the very beginning, not necessarily your product. You may have an amazing product, you may have this domain expertise that's amazing, but at the end of the day, at the very beginning, at the early stages, they're investing in you. And they get to get to know you. Are you accountable? Are you coachable? Those are very important things as you're talking to investors to keep in mind.
That was great. Thank you, everybody. So my question, talking about investing in you, is a lot of the times when we talk about a good pitch, people start with a good story, right? Like right now, I feel like those two things are very commonly tied together. Like your pitch is, in essence, your story with your problem that you're trying to solve, your story trying to find the solution. Can you have a good pitch without it being tied to a good story? What if you don't have a personal, maybe your problem doesn't resonate with you or your life experiences? How do you navigate that?
There's this term of founder problem fit or product market fit. I think when you are living in that true product market fit is meaning that you are the right person and you have the right product to succeed in the market and do it in a major way, right? So to have that, I think it comes with the stories. Like if you don't have that, you don't actually have the story. So that I think the pair, those two coming together, is a sign that you're on the right track. So if you don't have the stories, go get the stories. And if you go get the stories, what you'll learn is that, hey, I have a better handle on the problem I'm solving. So just an example from my experience, I started in biomedical engineering, and my first internship was in a lab with pipetting DNA and shearing chemicals, and it was something that I realized this is not the problem that I want to solve in my life. So I switched my major to industrial systems engineering. I have a story, but I realized that that wasn't the problem I needed to solve. So I think when you're going down this road, a tester, for you as you're validating your ideas, gathering those stories, going to talk to customers, having one-on-ones, doing listening sessions, seminars, so you can gather that insight. Because when you tell the story, we're humans, how we share information is based upon stories and narratives. So the way to captivate not only investors, but also your customers is by telling stories. So I would challenge you to go gather those stories, and then once you have them, validate, is this the right problem that I'm solving? Am I the right person? Or should I pivot? And it's okay to pivot. I pivoted, and I think all of us will pivot sometime in life. So I would say that those two go together.
Yeah, I would basically put it this way, that I think being a good storyteller is really important to be memorable and to sort of stand out. Because I think, basically everybody out there these days is thinking, oh, I'm an AI-enabled blah for blah. Everything sort of sounds kind of the same. And so I think it's important to have a good story to sort of really stand out and really resonate. I think the key distinction I would make is that your story doesn't necessarily have to be how you started this company or how you don't need to think like, oh, this thing killed my grandma, so I have to do this to get revenge or whatever. The founder problem fit is an important piece of this, but when you sort of look at how startups evaluate it, it's not sort of one common metric for everything. And so maybe you are a compelling startup because you invented this new technology to solve nuclear fusion. Maybe you're really compelling because you've gone from $0 to $10 million in 2 weeks. Maybe you're really compelling because you're Yan LeCun or you're Fei-Fei Li, and you can basically raise $1 billion to go create sort of world models. And so all of these different factors that contribute to why a startup is successful, you basically want to highlight the piece that you're strongest at, highlight the piece that really differentiates you, and basically build the story sort of around that versus try to make a story, force fit a story to any one particular thing.
Not to sound repetitive, I'm going to add a different angle, right? So if storytelling is definitely captivating when it comes to pitching, but I think it's more necessary when these investors or customers aren't necessarily from your space, right? You want to tell a story so that they can resonate and understand where you're coming from, as opposed to you have somebody with the domain expertise. You don't necessarily need to provide the fluff. You can kind of get straight to the point to say, hey, I'm building this for this, and this is exactly the domain expertise I have, this is the traction we have. You can kind of get straight to the point. But for those that don't come from your space, and you kind of have to dilute what you're saying and explain, you probably want a story to come with that pitch just to do that soft landing for them so they can understand where you're coming from.
Thank you all. I think having listened to a lot of stories and a lot of pitches, there's crazy parallels between them, just like a short story versus someone's elevator pitch. A lot of the founders I talked to about their slides and about their pitch decks and all of that stuff, I think people can vouch for me here that I've said, tell a story. Don't just tell me what you're building and why you think it's great, but give us something to believe in, and then give us something to back that up. So I wanted to talk about the numbers and the kind of turning that into a real believable thing, where it's not just a pitch, but it's a startup that people actually think is real, and you're actually doing something to work towards that startup. A really great way to do that is numbers and traction. But a lot of people, when they pitch for the first time, don't have those. Could you share some ways about how you think you can kind of add legitimacy to your pitch without necessarily having numbers, or is that something that you have to have to be taken seriously?
Great question. There's a few ways to approach that. I would say, you always start with basic research, right? Google, AI, your favorite AI tool. then you need to validate those numbers, right? So you may think an idea is great, okay, we did the research, we've done, number of customers we can attain, now let's go validate that. So you should always have some type of numbers, right? And how you legitimize those numbers is with our stories, right? With actual customer interviews, conversations, and metrics. Like right now, one of my startups is running a pilot, and we're gaining deep data and metrics on, are we actually solving a problem? And to what extent? So I think those things have to be a part of your hypothesis and experiment. Startups are experiments, and a lot of them fail. But how you de-escalate that or de-risk that is you run these experiments. So yes, I think a great pitch deck will have that. I will add one caveat though. When we talk about market space, like I said, that's an interesting one, right? Like what was the market space of ChatGPT in 1990 or NVIDIA in 1980? These are new companies in blue ocean space that are creating new market space. So some of that stuff is you have to learn it and evolve it over time. You do have to try to communicate that as close as possible, but it's an art at times and less of a science, but it still is something that you should at least do your research on.
Yeah, I think with numbers, obviously, the goal usually is to sort of show revenue and you have millions of dollars and traction and whatnot. But I think you can sort of break down the funnel and sort of figure out what are the intermediate steps to sort of get there. So maybe you're not quite revenue ready, but maybe you can sort of build out sort of the pipeline. And so you say, okay, these are the number of customers I've signed on. These are customers who maybe haven't signed a contract, but they've committed to sign an MOU or LOI to deploy us. Or even before that, it's like, these are the, you're having just more informational interviews. Like, I've talked to these many people said they would buy it, something like that. And so there are sort of intermediate steps you can take before you get to revenue that help you sort of get there and sort of, prove your point. And, you can show, say, hey, we launched on, we launched publicly, this is how many website visitors we have, this is how many LinkedIn followers we have. Again, this is not something that's going to, work in a Series B or Series C kind of thing, but when you talk about a pre-seed kind of startup, it's sort of a way to sort of show that you're getting some interest, you're getting some traction, and it's a way to sort of prove the way that you're on your way there. I think the other thing to think about, beyond just sort of pure numbers, like I don't think numbers are the end all be all. I think they're a great way to basically rebut any questions people have about you. But then this goes back to some of the other vectors, like beyond traction. Talk about your team, talk about the market, talk about the technology there. I think one of the key things why the market comes in is it's not so much that the 5-year projection of your company is the most important thing. The main thing for these companies, the way venture capital works, is they need to basically get like 100x return on their investment. And so they need to make sure that the market you're going after is, generally speaking, $1 billion market versus something that's worth $10,000 or $100,000. And so the idea is you want to sort of prove that what you're doing is applicable to sort of this long-term big opportunity. You don't have to be there day one. You don't have to win 5% of that market. But the idea is you have to be able to tell your story in terms of how you get there.
Is this on? Nope. Hello? Nope. All right.
Hello, we're back. So what I would say is, you don't, in the beginning, and I'm assuming everyone in here is like ideation pre-seed, potentially. You don't necessarily need the traction to convince an investor. What you need to do is demonstrate the knowledge and the work and homework you've done to really understand the space. So just like what Larry was saying is, have you done that customer validation, that market validation? How many people have you spoken to? Did you do the focus groups? Did you do the surveys? Demonstrate to me how invested you are in really truly solving this problem before the traction comes. That is something that is beneficial to you and how you perceive to the investor, because as I mentioned before, you're trying to build trust. So if you go to an investor and say, hey, we're trying to solve this problem, we talked to X amount of customers, this is what they've told us, this is what the market has told us before we even have something to demonstrate or to prototype. That just demonstrates you've done the work, you've done your homework and you're knowledgeable on the space, or you at least have the grit and the hunger to actually go out there and obtain that knowledge for this solution.
Wrong way.
Max, do you have a question you want to ask there?
fine. Why don't you send another one? I'll work on mine a little longer.
I just want to tag on to what Larry said. I think in a traditional sense, when you think about investment, everybody's in this pre-seed stage, pre-idea or idea stage, right? I think traditionally when folks have talked about investment or rounds, like we look at those large markets, and that's great. Like you have find that idea, right? I hope someone in here finds the next ChatGPT, right? Don't forget me when you do it. But also the dynamics of markets have changed. Before you needed, like Larry said, a large amount of money to attack that market. As in the first company, when we built a mobile app that was cross-platform, we're talking about a 6-figure cost of a team of 8, front-end engineers, back-end engineers, maybe a marketer, like et cetera, to go to market. Now, it's a fraction of that cost. So you don't necessarily need the big dollar amount to do something amazing. You need to have an idea and an interest in a problem and go solve that. And what you'll find is that instead of reaching a mid-market, there's a book called Crossing the Chasm. Hopefully you all have read it or will read it. Typically, we will want to go towards that mid-market where the majority of people are, and that's great, you should go there. But there's also a lot of value in this early adopters and long tail markets are basically like things on the edge, right? You could do really great there, and it doesn't need to be a venture backable idea, so to speak. So I just wanted to tag along to that because sometimes that could be deflating for some folks, but there's actually a lot of value there.
Great points, and they're giving me too many questions that I want to ask. I've got 2 left. I do want to remind everyone, we've got a QR code, please submit questions. The first that I want to jump into is, how do you, like you said, not everything's venture backable, but you alluded to this earlier, everything does need to be able to be pitched. It will come up, whether it's to yourself, whether it's to a co-founder, whether it's to the person at the bank that's authorizing a small business loan. Could you maybe talk about how you can, know your audience? I know I asked this already. Know your audience, but also know what your goal is. You don't want to lie and say this is going to be a $10 billion total addressable market when it's not. Talk a little bit about how you pitch to those different groups.
Great question. Traditionally, I'm not a person that pitch. I'm an engineer. I like to build, but I've pitched twice in 2 different competitions. One started my first company. It was like $2,500. The second one was $10,000, and that was just last year. What I've learned from this is that you need to know who you're talking to because that's going to influence what you say, how you come across it, how they perceive the problem, and if they even think it's a problem. In this second company that we're building, it's a smart tech solution for sports teams. And when I talk to people who are coaches, who are on those teams, like their eyes light up. I'm like, wow, this is great. This is something I want to learn more about. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? When I speak to an investor that knows that or has invested in that, they're excited. And you basically get in sync with that energy. And I think that the key is, right, when you, again, going back to the stories, the product market fit or the founder problem fit, when you're talking to the right person, you're going to feel it. And when you're not, you know that that's the direction to go into the place that you need to go to solve the actual problem that you need to. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about Silicon Valley is people are surprisingly receptive to having conversations, and grabbing coffee to start talking about ideas and things like that. And so I think particularly, just you can probably find some people just through cold email, other San Jose State alumni or whatever, to go reach out to and sort of just say, hey, like I'm an alum like you, I want to go, I'm thinking about doing this. Obviously, if you can plug into a program like SpartUp, that will help you get even more people to do that. But beyond that, I'll say what's really interesting is the opportunities with AI. And so I think obviously you could use a general purpose chatbot like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatnot. Upload your deck, ask for feedback, basically have it ask you questions and things like that. And it actually works pretty well, I think, to sort of get you a sense of how your pitch is. One thing that I think is really interesting is there's a thing, I don't remember the URL, but it's basically called the YC rejection simulator. It's super harsh, it's pretty funny, but basically it was trained based on, I think, like YC feedback and Paul Graham's books and things like that. And it is really, really harsh, but it really has really good feedback in terms of what's wrong and sort of say, in terms of what problem are you trying to solve, and it's kind of roast you on it. But it's actually pretty good feedback. Just don't take everything at face value and sort of read it. But like I said, I think AI is LLMs are perfect for this kind of thing. And like what some companies done, I think like Uber, for example, they've actually created a digital twin of their CEO. And so what the internal team does is they basically pitch to their AI digital twin to sort of get that feedback before they go talk to him in real life. And I think you could basically use AI as a proxy for a VC to sort of get some of that initial feedback.
I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
Trying to back up right here. Pretty much, I think there are different avenues you can go with this, but how do you know what to pitch? How to be honest with what you're solving, who you're pitching to? Like, you could kind of allude to identifying who you need to pitch to at what stages of startups. I'm sure that comes up with the students you're talking to that think they need to go to VCs, but actually need to talk to a co-founder or pitch to a new team member.
I guess the only advice I can really give in that stance is like being hyper aware of where you are and what you're building. There's different types of capital that exist, non-dilutive, CDFIs, community development financial institutions, angels, VCs. So again, it just goes back to really understanding who you're speaking with, doing the pattern matching on the investor side or customer side as well. And then with your potential co-founders and people that you're trying to bring onto your team. You just have to do an excessive amount of due diligence, truthfully, like across the board. When it comes to your customer, investors, bringing on the team, just make sure you're doing your homework, crossing your T's and dotting your I's.
It's funny you brought up. This came back to life and then it died. Perfect. I know we don't have a ton of people. I could probably just be loud enough. Anyways, it's funny you bring up the YC rejection simulator. We used to have one of those. His name was Chavi, and he worked with SpartUp for 2 years. And his tagline, you'd come to SpartUp, right? And he was he was actually the first ecosystem manager. So he was responsible for all of the student inbound to try and connect them with our people in our mentorship network and all that. And he would host office hours where students would come and they would pitch their ideas to him. And his first line, 70% of the people he would meet with is, "I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't understand." And obviously, that's not necessarily great feedback, and that's where I want to go with my question. But what it amounted to is he didn't get who the customer was. He didn't get what the product was. There were so many different layers of things that you may not understand that are critical aspects of a pitch to make it quality, to resonate with whoever it is that you're pitching to. At this point, it's someone who's literally trying to plug you into adequate resources to help you advance with whatever it is that you're trying to work on, whether it's you're actually looking for advisors, you're looking for mentors, you need help with raising money, you need to find your first customer. And so as a founder who's pitching to customers, to investors, to potential co-founders, how do you make sure that you're receptive to good feedback, and how do you sort through feedback to make sure that what you're hearing is not just mom test, right? Like, oh, this is great, yeah, someday give me a call, oh, here's my email, send me a message, no sooner than 6 months and maybe we'll talk. How do you make sure that you're receptive to it and you implement it properly?
Can I go first?
Yes, absolutely.
So really quick, as a founder, you're gonna get a lot of advice, right? People are gonna be saying, "Oh, this works in this area, this works in that area, you should try this, you should try that." You're gonna get a lot of feedback, right? What I will say is take everything with a grain of salt. What I mean by that is taking the advice, fully assess it, digest it, and figure out what resonates with you and what doesn't, right? You're gonna get from investors telling you which direction to move, mentors, potential teammates, you're gonna get it from all over. But as the CEO, as the founder, you need to have the discernment and have the decision-making power to make sure you're really going down the path. At the end of the day, you came up with this idea, you have the vision for the idea. So as long as you can validate the direction that you're going, just stick with it. But to be coachable, of course, take the feedback. You're gonna get feedback everywhere. But just be receptive, but just, don't let them derail you from what you're initially trying to do. You came up with this idea, you have a passion for this idea, just keep moving in that direction.
I think, you know, ultimately this is why humans still matter, because I think judgment still matters. And so it's always tough to say, like, you know, should you stay the course? Should you pivot? Should you, you know, listen to everything they say, or don't listen to what they say? I think there's two things to think about. I think one is think about how many people you receive the same feedback from. And, you know, if it's something that's, you know, like, you know, once might be, twice might be a coincidence, 3 times it starts with something that's really clear. Number two, think about the incentives of the person to sort of go talk to you. And, you know, like, is it something that's trying to sell you a service, or is it something that, you know, wants to give you money? And the interesting thing about, you know, when you talk with VCs, they don't really give you that much constructive criticism that you can work off of a lot of time. I think, you know, when we were talking about traction earlier, for example, a lot of times if the VC doesn't want to be mean, they'll basically say, oh, come talk to us when you reach 100,000, $1 million, things like that. It's a way that they can basically say you're not a good fit without giving you sort of a real reason why. And certain people will have that incentive to, you know, not burn these bridges. Others, you can sort of really sort of trust their judgment. But like I said, there's no, I think, hard and fast rule. I think, you know, you may be right, you may be wrong, but over time, I think if you sort of hear a lot of people talking about it, you know, really think about it. You don't necessarily have to agree on it. You don't necessarily have to act on it. But I think, you know, take everything to heart, but don't take it personally, and, you know, see what you can change and see what you don't want to change.
For me, my rule of thumb is more data is better. I want as much data as possible, right? So whether it's good data, bad data, of course I'm looking at where the data comes from, right? Garbage in, garbage out. But let's talk about good data. As much data as possible. I think that is when you as a founder, a unique person, becomes very valuable, because now it's your discernment and your metrics of how do you make sense of that data? How do you connect the dots? How do you see reoccurring patterns in that data? But if you don't have the data, you can't really make a data-driven decision, right? So as a founder, early stage data is customers, investors, people on the street. I test pitches, different types of pitches with different people to get their feedback. And you want to aggregate that in a way and have very crucial factors in how you make your decisions in your business in terms of product, in terms of marketing, and then you validate that against money in, right? Based on that decision, have you generate revenue? Have you brought in investment? Have you actually proven your point and gone further down the path that you're looking to go down? If yes, then maybe you're on the right track. If no, let's go back to the data, right? Maybe we need new sets of data. So I think that, you know, it's a process. You have to develop your own formula. You have to see through the fog in a way, right? Because you're gonna get a lot of different signals, right? Some people post on social media, if they get 1,000 likes, that's their signal. But if that's not your business, then it doesn't matter if you have 1 like or 1,000. We don't do marketing. A lot of people from my first company, we didn't do marketing. It was all referral based and word of mouth. And it's done really good for us. But the point of that is we didn't make money from, you know, posting on social media or me eating my food. Like, that wasn't a metric of success. So I would say all data is good. Look at it, decipher it, put it through your own filter, and then make a decision. And then go back. It's a loop, right? Continue to go through that OODA loop, what it's called. And it'll lead you to success, hopefully.
Those are all fantastic answers and something I think every founder could learn a lot from. Especially on the feedback side from investors. If you take every piece of feedback that you get and you implement it right away, and this includes for people like myself, incubator people, investors, all of the above, you're going to have the weirdest pitch deck of all time. It's not gonna, the parts are gonna be all mismatched, it's not gonna make any sense. So you have to, like everyone said, make those decisions yourself, see what resonates with you, and go from there. I'm gonna ask one last question that I think will be really applicable to everybody, and then we'll get into audience questions. So in about 30 days from now, a lot of people in this room, Spartan viewers in general, are gonna have the opportunity to have 2 minutes to pitch at Pitch Jam. And 2 minutes does not sound like a lot of time, and it isn't a lot of time. And we do it that way because it really distills it down to the important pieces. And we talked about feasibility, viability, and desirability is kind of our three main pillars there. But could you share a little bit about what's like one must-have for you in an elevator style pitch? And maybe it's two or three, maybe it's just one really important and not slack.
Oh man, that's a tough one, but it's fun. So I mentioned earlier, you should have different types of pitches: 5-minute pitch, 2-minute pitch, 30 seconds, and even less. One of the things we said with our recent product, when we have very small time, is if we could help you win your games, and at 27% likely that you will win your games, would you be open to another conversation? So in that very quick snippet, I'm not talking about our features or our tech or how tough or how cool it looks. I'm talking about the value and the benefit to my customer or whoever else I'm talking to. So I would say in that 2-minute pitch, what is that impact? Like, drive home that impact. And for different companies, it's different, right? That may come in the form of a story, maybe your market, maybe your traction. But really drive home your impact, and I think you'll leave a lasting impression.
Yeah, I think the mistake a lot of founders make is they oftentimes will spend way too much time talking about the problem. I work with Berkeley Skydeck, and for our startup pitches, we basically say the only instruction we give them is you have 8 minutes, spend only 1 minute on your problem, because that's the place where people always spend too much time trying to talk about the markets or paint these things. I think really the two things I would really encourage you to think about for a 2-minute pitch. One is, why is the problem that you're solving a pain that someone is willing to pay money for? This is not just a nice to have, but it actually really is a painkiller that's solving for you. Number two, what really makes you distinct from everybody else out there? I think everybody's using similar terms around AI and all the agents and all these things like that. Really, what's sort of your unique, your proposition there? And I think it's really sort of make those two things, really, really clear. I think it's really easy to get into the weeds on some of these things. Talk about the problem, talk about your team, talk about your experiences. I think you want to get really clear about, why you're there, what the solution is, and why it's going to win.
I'm gonna be overkill. There's three things. I think you should have in that 2-minute pitch, and I'm just putting my investor hat on so I can fully understand what that 2-minute pitch is. One is, what's the solution? And then who's the team to provide that solution? From an investor standpoint, cool, you have a solution, you've articulated the value you're gonna provide. Who's providing the solution? If you don't have the expertise, the domain expertise, the passion, the knowledge, it's gonna be a little skeptical as far as what you're pitching. So those are the two things, the solution and then the team. The last thing I would say is most founders forget about the ask. Like, what are you asking for? It may not be money in this situation, but maybe it's an introduction, maybe you're looking for some human talent, right? So make sure you have an ask at the end of your pitch. A lot of founders forget that, especially in a small amount of time, 1-minute pitch, 2-minute pitch. You completely forget what the whole purpose was of pitching, and that's the ask.
That was great, thank you guys. Before Eli jumps into the audience questions, I want to talk very quickly about preparedness. So one thing, like I range in how articulate I am based on how comfortable I am, and obviously I'm somewhat comfortable being up here in front of the room, and I do this, a couple times a year, and it ranges from well to moderate sometimes, and so I tend to be overconfident when I'm giving a pitch. So I was asked to be a part of a team that, the founder was here last time. His name's Andrew. He's the founder of Concussion Coach, and I went with him and the team to pitch. It was essentially a Rotary Club in the North Bay, and it was a philanthropy group made up of all wealthy, high net worth individuals who were just interested to hear more about what he was working on. He had a tie to the group, and they invited him and us to a 7 a.m. Saturday meeting. And again, everybody there was like over 65, right? It was a retirement group. And again, like I felt prepared. I knew the pitch. I'd written it all out on a piece of paper. I'd read it a few times, and I was like, I'm a decent public speaker. The more comfortable I am, like I'll be good. I'll be in my element. I'll show up a few minutes early. I'll meet a few people. And I got there and I was nervous. And like I didn't ruin the pitch, but I looked nervous. Like I know I looked nervous because I felt nervous. I changed a few little words up in my pitch, which was like for me, and again, like I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but like you shouldn't necessarily memorize your pitch word for word, right? You set yourself up for failure. but I found myself shuffling sentences in a way that I wasn't quite ready to do because I'd only said them a few times and I didn't know it front to back. And so, how would you guys advise founders who are going to be, given 2 minutes to pitch on how to best prepare themselves to not go over, not go under, how to stay to the script if there is a script, and how to make sure that the takeaways come through?
Good stuff. I've also fell into that trap before, Max. You're not the only one. I think sometimes you can get comfortable in what you're doing. You're actually in it and you live it. So you may take some things for granted in terms of who you're talking to, but I think the learning from that mistake is always being ready, and this is that moment, right? So learning that. But from the past pitch competitions, it's been, you have your slide deck, no more than 10, less is probably better. You have cues on that slide deck where you know what is your point, what is that main piece, and how do you transition to the next thing. And you go through that, and for me, I timed myself and I recorded myself, and I didn't like how it sounded or how it looked, but I needed to get that down to a specific time. Day of, I usually don't pitch because I want that natural vigor to show up, right? You never want to read every single word. You'll mess it up every time. So in preparation, it's repeatedly going through your pitch, repeatedly timing it, understanding how you can be smoother with the transition, what important point on each slide deck do I need to get across before I move to the next thing, and be as concise as possible. It's going to go quicker than you think. So I would say practice as much as possible.
Yeah, I think particularly with something like a 2-minute pitch, I think I would, I'm not a scripting kind of person in general when I pitch. I like to sort of just know the content is about it. But for like a 2-minute pitch, I think the time is such a big thing that I would actually script it out, time yourself, practice it over and over again. Maybe you start off by literally reading off the paper, but then eventually you take away the paper and sort of practice and sort of, and you sort of, go off of memory from there. But I do think, these sort of short pitch sort of sessions are not, it's like a completely different animal than, pitching to an investor. When you're pitching an investor, you actually probably want it to be conversational and sort of things like that. And so just realize that they're kind of two different things. But yeah, I think particularly for a time pitch, really practice it quite a bit. The one thing I would also say is, if possible, put out your phone or something that has the time, so you can sort of track yourself and make sure that you're not cut off mid-sentence at 2 minutes and things like that.
I'm a little obsessive, and I was an athlete in college, and so I'm extremely competitive. So I would just say practice, 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 and there are 4 ways that you can do that. 1, pitch in the shower. That's not an exaggeration. Literally, while you're showering, pitch in your head, talk out loud. The second thing is look at yourself in the mirror. Time yourself and look at yourself in the mirror to understand what your facial expressions look like, what those nonverbals look like. You want to expand from there and actually record yourself, right? So if there's no visual aid, you're just kind of 2 minutes, I'm guessing it's off the top of the cusp. So you want to make sure that your nonverbals are resonating with the audience. How are you positioning your body? What hand gestures do you make? Record yourself and actually calculate and grade yourself on how you've pitched. The other thing I would say is just pitch to random people. I used to randomly walk up to people like, hey, can I pitch you really quick? They have no idea who the hell I am. I just said, whatever, I'm trying not to curse, sorry. Just said, whatever, like, I'm just gonna pitch you, and then I'll get this random feedback. How did I come off? Did I come off as confident? This, that, and the third. And then I lied, I'm gonna add another one. Day of, I would just pitch. Just keep pitching so that when you are actually on that stage, it's just like you're on autopilot, right? You do those things, I promise you, in a month, it'll come off as very natural.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think practice is important. I think everyone here can agree. And it's also really obvious when you pitch if you have practiced. So you want that for yourself and you want that for your pitch so you can win some money. Before I get into these questions, we actually will have a timer that you will be able to see during pitch jam. So use that phone to make sure that you can keep it under there. You don't want the alarm beeping at you at the end of your pitch when you're getting your key point across. All right, for these questions, if everyone wants to answer, go for it. If you want to skip one, You don't have to answer every single one. I want to start off with someone asked, actually, what are the best tips and strategies for building a well-structured pitch deck that can stand on its own when you can't deliver the pitch live? So if you're sending something in an email or someone asked for a deck.
So it's sending an email or recorded, pre-recorded.
Sending an email or deck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I try not to send too much information in an email, right? I want to leave the hook for later, or just give them enough to pique their interest. But I think as long as you have those same core elements as how you would pitch in person, I think that's still the standard, right? You don't want to deviate from that. But I always just a personal thing. They say don't spill your candy in the lobby, right? I want to keep something special for when it is in person, because that dynamic conversation, you might be able to pick up on a cue that can lead you down the road you want to go down. So I wouldn't deviate too much from what I have on my deck or my actual pitch.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to keep it sort of short, like 10, 15 slides at most. I think it doesn't need to be a carbon copy of what you would present. Given that you're not there to explain it, you maybe want to put a little bit more text on it and sort of explain things a little bit more than you maybe would need to if you were to present it, in person. But like I said, make sure it's sort of complete, sort of covers all the bases that we've been talking about. What is the problem? What is the solution? What's unique? What does the competition look like? What does your team look like? What's your business model? Make sure you have all the key basics there.
I would just say to keep it very simple. Don't do heavy content. You will bore someone to death. The goal is not to close in sending that deck. The goal is to get another conversation. Every time you talk to an investor, you should be thinking in your mind, how can I get another conversation with this person? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, 8 to 12 touch points. So most likely you're sending that pitch deck around the 3rd or 4th time. They're not going to write a check that 3rd or 4th time, so you just want enough to breadcrumb them to have another conversation with you. So keep it very simple, very straightforward, and leave them asking more.
Awesome, thank you all. I have one here that says, what are some unique ways to introduce your product to the market when your entire business concept is to avoid conventional approaches? It's a bit of a wild card if anyone wants to take a shot at it.
One more time, say it again.
What are some unique ways to introduce your product to the market when our entire business concept is to avoid conventional approaches? I think they're asking, this is a new thing, we don't like to be conventional. How can we get that across without making anyone too mad?
I don't know how to answer this question. I'll just say, do random stuff. You're experimenting in the very beginning, so with your marketing or your go-to-market strategy, experiment in the same notion. Try different things. Try things that you don't see. Try things off the cusp. Try working with maybe individuals, groups, partners that no one's actually thinking about in your space. It might provide you a different lens and perspective.
I think, just to add some of my own insight onto that one, I think there are a lot of things that a lot of people do for very good reason, and to be unconventional as your entire approach may be a problem at some point. It could also work, but there's a lot of stuff that works really well. Someone asked, this is a pitch practice related one. Are there any ways to make practicing your pitch more enjoyable and less of a chore, especially if you're very self-critical?
I think for me, so you want to have of course, your core elements of your pitch, but I would sometimes play with my introduction. I would use different examples. I try to be funny. I would use a question. I would use data points. And I think that at least the fun for me was seeing how it lands with the audience, seeing who responded and how often and confident was that response. And then it becomes a conversation, a nonverbal conversation a lot of times. So I think for me, that was the exciting part of just trying new things, throwing in a joke, right? And seeing how it lands.
I'll say, like, if you're not that excited to talk about the product, maybe it's not the right product for you, is a possibility. I know, it's just like, when a guy meets a girl and he's really infatuated, he finds ways to sort of bring her up and, talk about things like that. like I said, hopefully, when you're going out and creating a company, it's not just about hopefully becoming rich because you're going to sell it for $1 million. Like, hopefully there's some passion to it behind you. There's like this Japanese concept called ikigai, which is about the intersection between what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you get paid for. And so I think the ideal startup that's sustainable will hopefully, those four circles intersect for you.
Yeah, if you think pitching is a chore, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur. This is not a 9 to 5. This is not a typical lifestyle. This is your life, right? So if you think pitching is a chore, like maybe you should just help another founder out with their startup and kind of just get out the game. This isn't for the faint of the weak.
I have something to add to that. Maybe to soften Rohan's take a little bit. No, that was good. That was part of the good feedback we were just talking about. That's genuinely good feedback. But I think to start with that side, if you genuinely are uncomfortable having like social conversations with people, pitching yourself, pitching your startup, you should find someone who's comfortable doing that to help you. Like that doesn't necessarily have to be what your cornerstone is as a founder, as one of your strengths, right? Like just some people just aren't great at communication, but then you have to find someone who is, because like Rohan said, it is the cornerstone of success for an early stage startup, is being able to articulate what it is that you do and why anyone should be able or should find time and money to pay you for your product or service. The other thing I would say is you have to, you don't fall in love with the process, you fall in love with what the future result is going to be, right? So like when you do like a set of push-ups, you're like, I'm gonna do 10 push-ups, and you're like, hi, my name is Max, and I'm an ecosystem manager, and I get to 3, and I'm like, no, I kind of crushed that. Like that was good, I know where I'm going, I know how to get to 10. It's way different than doing 10 push-ups, so.
That was all great. I think also, you're still gonna have to pitch that co-founder to.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Still gonna have to pitch that co-founder to join your team, so it might not be your forte. Don't spend 80% of your time on it, but do spend 10% figuring out how to get into it. Let's see. Someone asked about the process of developing a patron story. So I'm imagining that they have an idea, but they haven't actually put time into or haven't figured out the pitch and storyline yet. Can you share some insight on how you ideate? Like, are you just sitting in a dark room by yourself trying to figure it out, or do you work through it with friends, or are you working through it with AI? What's your process like there?
I think it's an interesting question. Whoever wrote it, we can talk more about it, but there's just core pieces of the pitch, right? And for each of those slides, you want to really, again, talk about the impact, right? So, you have the market slide, you have the problem side. My favorite is like the product and solution slide. And you're looking at those things first individually, and then after that, I try to bring this common thread through all of them. So, it's very different when you're in it by yourself versus when you share it with someone, because then they have their feedback. And you share it with another person, they have different feedback. So I think that's when you start to make bigger progress. You share it with others instead of just looking at it as an individual thing, and I have to get it perfect before I share it. It rarely happens that way.
Yeah, I think, like for me, like I do like to sort of iterate and sort of craft and build things, in PowerPoint. Like I'll just create a bunch of random slides, put them down, maybe look at a side sort of view and sort of see sort of how the flow goes and things like that. I don't think it's a universal way for people to do it, but that's just the way I do it. I think, again, with AI, it's actually, trivially easy. You use Google Gemini and Canvas, or you use Gamma, and you can basically just, just sort of start talking and just write down the text or have it capture the text and tell them to go create a presentation for you. And so the good part is with AI, you don't have to start with a blank page anymore. You can basically have a first draft of it, and you go into it and revisit it, and sort of see how you want to fix it and whatnot. But really, I think just sort of get started, start moving, and sort of continue to iterate. Like your first version is not going to be the final version.
I'd say whoever you're solving a problem for, your customer, they're probably gonna give you some insight how you should be constructing your pitch, right? What are the pains that they're going through that you can incorporate? I would say start from there. Obviously, leverage AI to a certain extent. AI is wonderful, AI is beautiful, but AI is not going to pay you. So I would say make sure you're getting feedback from individuals after you reiterate or do iterations online or to yourself in some dark room. Go talk to someone and see what they have to say, and you get that feedback and go from there.
Can I jump in? So I was talking to an audience member when I first walked in, and I thought it was a really good question. I want to make sure that I asked it, and hopefully it's on your list as well. But how do you do cold outreach to find people to pitch? Like, I know you said you talk to random people. We have a professor here, Ray Combs. Is anybody in Professor Ray Combs' class? Okay, he usually sends students, but maybe he has a midterm today. I know it's like literally peak midterm season right now. That being said, what he would do is he had a lot of flights in and out of the San Jose airport. And so before his flight, he would walk around the airport and he would find what he called like the best captive audience money can buy, which was the price of a plane ticket. And for 45 minutes, these people were bored out of their mind. And he would sit down next to them and be like, hey, I'm working on something. Can I talk to you about it? Can I pitch this to you? What do you think about this? And he would talk to half of the people that would end up being on his flight. And I love that story. I thought it was such an awesome way to meet new people. Now, that being said, to give you a glimpse of when this happened, Ray was the project manager for the Kindle. So people didn't have iPhones or anything when he was doing this. It was like very early 2000s. So people were more receptive to interpersonal communication at the gate of your flight than they probably are now. So what would you guys say? You know, maybe it's LinkedIn cold outreach, maybe it's emails, maybe it's attending SpartUp events and reaching out to mentors or speakers. What do you guys think?
So yeah, that's one way to do it. I think for most people, that's at the extreme, right? Like when we were kids, you would tell them like, hey, don't talk to strangers. So some of us still have that in us, right? You have phones in it, so it's tough. But I do some things like that too. I think there's an exercise in terms of documenting your network. Everybody in here has a network, right? Your network is your net worth. So your network, you have most people in here probably have 5 close people, at least 5 close, let's say 3 close people to them, right? Maybe that's your family, someone you grew up with, that's your close circle. Then you have a network slightly outside of that, right? People that you may see in class that you don't talk to as often. And then you have a network outside of that that you don't know, that outer network knows. So what you do is, what I've done is starting with that smaller circle, right? Usually it's, you're talking to your mom about tech, she doesn't know anything about it, right? She might say, hey, that's great. But what you're doing is you're practicing. Then when you get to that outer circle, maybe your classmate, someone that you're in a class with or project with, they could probably give you some more feedback. You still know them, right? So it's not so cold, but it gives you that confidence and it gives you a better pitch. At a certain stage, you start to ask for referrals. Hey, who do you know? Now you have to have a quick pitch. Hey, I'm working on this for this person and it solves it by X, right? Do you know someone who would be interested in that? Right? That is that next step to now, okay, maybe I have 3 other people that you can talk to, warm introduction through an email, and now you have another opportunity. And it's not, Joe Blow who's about to jump on a plane and he's like, why are you talking to me, right? Because that could kill your confidence, but you have to do it. You're gonna do it eventually. So, that was an exercise I tried that helped me a lot, still helps, and continue to do it.
Yeah, I think the great part about being in Silicon Valley is there's a lot of organizations, meetups, groups that you can sort of go to meet other entrepreneurs, meet investors, and sort of find a way to go reach out. Like I said, I think being here at San Jose State, you guys have a great ecosystem of not just current students and faculty, but alumni that you guys reach out to. And I think just leverage the networks that you have.
I kind of like the pitching at the airport. I think that was actually pretty cool. I would say I'm still gonna double down on that. Talk to a bunch of strangers. Get as much feedback as you can because everybody knows 6 degrees of separation, right? So you never know who knows who. But if I was a founder, I'm first starting off, and AI exists, you have all these LLMs. Literally go into chat and say, show me all the angel investors in San Jose, the Bay, whatever it comes up with. use that, take it and put it into a database, and then start doing that outreach. Find them on LinkedIn, find their website. 2 things that you should keep in mind. If it's an organization such as like Band of Angels or Sand Hill Angels, they have a touch point person. Figure out who that person is, reach out to them. If it's not the direct investor, there's somebody like a secretary, whatever, that you can tap into that's a little bit more accessible. Outside of that, I would just, you gotta get out there. You gotta make your data list, do the outreach, outgoing email, LinkedIn, multi-pronged approach. One solution, one way is not gonna always work. You gotta try different things at once.
Oh, the one thing I'll add is don't data pitch. It's not worth it.
I'm gonna add one piece of advice that we say at every single startup event. We almost missed the chance to work it into this one, but it's use your .edu email. Send emails from that email. It's really hard to get one. You almost can't pay for one because that's paying for university. So send emails from that. People are way more likely to help you if you're a student. It's a cheat code in cold email.
Really quick, honestly, he's absolutely right. As a student, you're gonna get a lot more reception because you're a student. If I were you, I'd be like, hey, I'm working on this project. Can you help me out? Make up the project. Maybe it's your solution, maybe it's your startup, but because you have that EDU, because you're saying you're from San Jose State University, I guarantee you more people are willing to give you the time because people want to give back to students in any type of way, shape, or form. So leverage it while you can before you graduate.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask one question. I saw it. Really excited to ask this one, and then we'll get into pizza. So, what is your number one worst pet peeve you see when watching a startup pitch? Can think on it for a second.
As an engineer, I like to see something that you can actually build. Like, we all have great ideas, right? I think for me, and I've invested before, but like when I see that, yes, you have a great idea, and yes, you can actually build it, not pay someone to build it, but build it, like that excites me. Because now I'm talking to the right person and not just has the idea but knows the road to get there. So I mean, that's the biggest pet peeve, just because you see so many pitches, it's like great, like okay, you may not have the product today, but are you willing to develop that scar tissue to actually build it, to stick with it?
Before it's a run, I would say don't do the thing where you say, oh, it's $100 billion market. If we can just get 1% of this, we get $1 billion.
Larry, you gotta say that again. I don't think we heard you.
I think the thing I would say is just don't do the top down things like, oh, this is a $100 billion market. All we need to do is collect 1% of it, and we're $1 billion company. It's just leave that out.
I'm trying not to go on a rant. There's several things I do not like. Some of them are just nitpicky and I'm just being like an a-hole or whatever, but I'll start with the more common one than the a-hole one. When you say you don't have any competitors, what are you talking about? First and foremost, if you have no competitors, then there's an issue, right? Even if it's a direct or there's an indirect solution to what you are doing. So please don't say you have no competition. At least point out what that indirect solution is or what the alternative is. Never say you have no competition. That pisses me off. The second thing I will say, just being nitpicky, if you mess up on your pitch, guess who's the only person in the room that knows you messed up on your pitch? You. Do not stop and apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake. Just pause, collect yourself, and continue. Do not apologize midst of your pitch. One, it's gonna derail what you're trying to say. Take a pause, 1-2 seconds, jump back into it. Please don't apologize. It irks me. But again, that's just me personally, whoever, like I'm sure everyone else doesn't care, but like me, it's just like, you're good, like keep going.
I'm curious, Eli, you listen to a lot of pitches. What's your answer to this question?
I think everyone I've given pitch advice to knows that it's too much text on the slides. It really bugs me. This might be me, but sometimes I just stop paying attention. Like, I don't want to read all of that. It's too many words. Now I can't. Now I've lost track of what you're saying. I've lost the plot of the pitch, it's gone. Might be a little harsh, but please don't. You're competing with your own slides. You don't need to do that.
This may not, to those of you who this doesn't resonate with, you may not believe that this happens, and to those of you who it does resonate with, you do not have to name yourselves. But my biggest pet peeve is when someone pitches me something within their pitch. So they'll be like, oh yeah, well, we're building XYZ for this customer to do this. And then as they're talking, they'll be talking about their problem, their solution, the things that they're building, their team, and they'll be like, oh, and then there's this other thing we're working on the side. And it'll be a completely different product, a different customer, a different team, or just two separate companies that two co-founders are trying to start in parallel. And the problem is when you start with one good idea, a lot of times a good idea breeds more good ideas. You start talking to customers, and then those customers are like, oh, this is amazing, but I would pay for this if it wasn't A, but it was 1A or B. And you're like, oh, that's amazing. We're going to start a second company to attack that potential market based off of one or two conversations that you've had, as opposed to pivoting your initial pitch and restructuring how you're thinking about the way that you're going to build this startup, this business, your target market. And so when you're giving a pitch to someone, make sure you're pitching your startup and not your startup's world.
I'm very glad I asked that question. I think that was fun and actually helpful for everyone here.